He had a happy family, but they mercilessly murdered his wife and daughter. Mafia even escaped punishment with the help of government officials.
I just wanted to say thanks for being in my corner.
On seeing this injustice, he lost his passion and perpetrated a streak of revenge that was absolutely unimaginable. Welcome back to Paramount Recaps. I don't have many subscribers, but your single comment is a ray of hope to motivate me. Clyde, a handy guy who loves tinkering, has a daughter who shares his passion. She makes him a bracelet and is working on one for her mom when Clyde's wife asks him to answer it. As soon as Clyde opens it, he's attacked and two burglars burst into the house. They tie him up and start robbing the place. One of the burglars, Darby, ominously says, "You can't fight fate," before stabbing Clyde. Darby's partner, Rupert, seems reluctant, but Darby shuts him down. Clyde is then forced to witness the horrific rape and murder of his wife. Tragically, his young daughter suffers the same fate when she walks in. Meanwhile, prosecutor Nick is discussing Clyde's case with a colleague. A judge recently ruled that crucial DNA evidence couldn't be used, forcing Nick to make a plea deal instead of going to trial. Nick believes that some justice is better than no justice at all. He meets with Clyde, who hands him notes he thinks might help, but Nick dismisses them. Nick then tells Clyde that Darby will testify against Rupert, ensuring Rupert gets the death penalty, while Darby will serve up to 5 years. Clyde, emotionally devastated, begs Nick not to take the deal, but it's already done. Nick coldly explains that the justice system isn't about what you know, but what you can prove, considering it a win. In court, the entire case is manipulated to make Rupert seem like the mastermind, while Darby, feeling invincible, quietly mocks Nick's wife and signs the plea deal. Outside, Nick addresses the press, while Darby sarcastically thanks him for being on his side. Nick is left stunned by the unfairness of it all. After a long day, Nick returns home to his wife, Kelly, and tries to calm down by talking to his unborn daughter. 10 years pass. Nick's daughter is now grown, but Nick remains busy with work, often missing out on family moments, like his daughter's school recital. Kelly is frustrated with his absence, especially today, as Rupert is set to be executed. Nick, along with his colleague Sarah, witnesses the execution. Rupert's last words claim he wasn't responsible for Clyde's family's deaths, unsettling both Nick and Sarah. During the lethal injection, something goes wrong, and Rupert dies a painful death instead of a peaceful one. The warden insists they're not to blame and that it's never happened before. A policeman then gives Nick a bottle with the phrase "Can't fight fate" written on it. Recognizing the phrase, Nick and the police begin investigating Darby's whereabouts. Meanwhile, Darby, who's in his apartment, gets a call from a muffled voice that knows everything about him. The voice sends Darby into a paranoid state, telling him to look out the window where he sees the police closing. Panicked, Darby grabs his gun and starts shooting at the police cars before being directed to an abandoned factory by the mysterious caller. On the way, Darby finds a sleeping cop, steals his gun, and forces him to drive to a deserted spot. At the location, Darby gets another call and discovers the voice belongs to Clyde. When Darby tries to shoot Clyde, the gun is rigged, and Darby is instead injected with a paralyzing serum that leaves him conscious but unable to move. Clyde then takes Darby to his warehouse, where he plans to torture him, making him feel the same helplessness Clyde felt 10 years ago. Clyde meticulously plans to prolong Darby's suffering before finally dismembering it, recording the entire process. Back at the police station, Nick and Sarah are discussing the botched lethal injection. Nick doubts Darby had the intelligence to pull off such a scheme. Not long after, the police find Darby's remains in 25 pieces, and Sarah realizes Clyde is the only person with a motive for such a brutal act. They investigate further and discover Clyde has sold all his assets and bought properties in strange locations, including the warehouse where Darby's body was found. The police head to Clyde's house, where he's calmly getting undressed as they arrive. He greets them naked and is arrested. As he's led to the car, Clyde gives Nick a menacing look. In Clyde's home, they find law books and a newspaper clipping showing Nick shaking hands with Darby. In the jail's interrogation room, the police have no solid evidence against Clyde, so they hope for a confession. Meanwhile, Nick's daughter receives a DVD she thinks is of a recital. She asks her mom to watch it, but her mom insists they wait for Nick. Curious, the daughter plays the DVD alone, only to find it's a recording of Clyde torturing Darby. Nick confronts Clyde, trying to act as if Clyde did the right thing. Clyde, in a roundabout way, admits he's been planning the murders of Darby and Rupert for years. Nick takes this as a confession and starts to leave, but Clyde stops him, reciting Nick's daily routine and telling him to sit down. Clyde smugly points out that everything he said is inadmissible because he never directly confessed to killing anyone, and the police have no proof. Even though Darby's body was found in Clyde's warehouse, Clyde owns multiple properties, so he can claim it was a setup. Clyde reminds Nick that the justice system isn't about what you know, but what you can prove. Clyde then offers to give a full confession if Nick does him a favor, get him a mattress. Nick, annoyed, refuses. Later, Nick's boss, Jonas, reprimands him for not taking a confession for a mattress, especially with no evidence, is a good trade. But Nick believes Clyde is playing games. Eventually, Clyde gets the mattress he wanted, but even in prison, others are eyeing it. The warden isn't happy with Clyde's demands either. In court, Nick argues to deny Clyde bail, but Clyde claims he's a law-abiding citizen and that Nick has no evidence to justify keeping him locked up without bail. The judge seems to agree with Clyde, especially since Nick mentions Clyde didn't follow through on his promise to confess. Clyde starts clapping and sarcastically points out how the judge was about to let a murderer walk free just because she heard some flattering words. Everyone is stunned as he continues to mock her for being so easily swayed before he's finally escorted out and bail is denied. Later, in the interrogation room, Clyde calls the tape he sent Nick a tale of good triumphing over evil. True to his word, he admits it was him on the tape. But Clyde isn't done. He has another confession, but he wants something in return. Nick, fed up with Clyde's games, rolls his eyes as Clyde requests a 20-ounce steak, cooked medium rare, and an iPod for lunch in prison. Before Nick leaves, Clyde throws in another piece of information, offering the whereabouts of Bill Reynolds, Darby's lawyer, as part of his confession. Nick goes back to his team and finds out that Bill has been missing for 3 days. Clyde, speaking into the camera, warns Nick that if he wants Bill to stay alive, he needs to meet Clyde's demands by 1 p.m. the next day. They get the steak delivered to the prison, but just 5 minutes before the deadline, the warden decides to check in with the prosecutors. They arrive at Clyde's cell 8 minutes late. Clyde, staying calm, tells them where to find Bill. He also drops the bombshell that the 1 p.m. deadline was for Bill, not for him, urging them to hurry. Nick rushes to a helicopter, and they fly to the location while Clyde, enjoying his steak and listening to his iPod, manipulates his cellmate, who had earlier threatened. They become buddies as Clyde turns up the music, handing over the iPod to his cellmate to distract him. Without warning, Clyde stabs him in the neck with the T-bone from a steak. The guards rush in, and the warden is fuming. Meanwhile, Nick arrives at the scene only to find Bill buried with an oxygen mask, but it's too late. He's dead. It took them 15 minutes to get there from the prison, meaning that if Clyde had gotten his lunch on time, Bill would still be alive. Nick gets a message from Sarah, informing him that Clyde just killed his cellmate, and that the warden is moving him to solitary confinement. Nick visits Clyde in solitary and confronts him about the point of all these murders. Clyde insists that he's holding everyone accountable for their actions. Nick, frustrated, hands Clyde his daughter's bracelet, asking if his family would be proud of him for taking revenge in their name. Clyde coldly responds that his wife and daughter can't feel anything anymore. They're dead. Nick and Jonas meet with a government official who spills more details about Clyde. The official explains that Clyde is a master tactician who can kill people without even being in the same room. If Clyde is in prison, it's because he wants to be there. The cellmate Clyde killed wasn't just a random victim. It was all part of his larger plan, removing a piece from the board in his twisted game. The official suggests they should look for Clyde's next move and warns Nick that the only way to stop Clyde might be to put a bullet in his head, as he's targeting everyone involved in his family's case. As the official leaves, he ominously adds, "If Clyde wants you dead, you're dead." Armed with this new information, Nick and Jonas head to the judge, asking for permission to violate Clyde's civil rights and restrict his visitation to protect everyone's safety. The judge agrees and signs the order. Just then, her phone rings, and when she answers it, it explodes. Everyone is left in shock. Nick returns to the prison to question Clyde about his accomplice and the purpose of all this revenge. Clyde gets angry, frustrated that Nick still doesn't understand. If Clyde had wanted revenge, he would have killed everyone involved in his family's case a long time ago. He gives Nick one last ultimatum: release him by 6 a.m. or everyone will die. Clyde is escorted to maximum security solitary confinement by a team of guards. Meanwhile, Nick and Sarah dig through documents at the prison, desperately searching for any clue about who might be helping Clyde from the outside, but they come up empty-handed. Sarah starts to doubt if they made the right decision to cut a deal with Darby back then. Nick reassures her that it was the best choice they had. The DA staff stays at the office until 6 a.m., but Nick eventually sends everyone home to rest. As Sarah starts her car, the bombs attached to the vehicles explode, killing everyone, including Sarah. With 6 officers dead, Nick is convinced that someone on the outside is helping Clyde. Nick and Jonas meet with the mayor, who can't believe how much destruction one imprisoned man has caused. She wants to fire Nick, but to reduce the media pressure on her, she appoints him as the new district attorney. The mayor of Philadelphia issues an emergency emergency order to lock down the entire city. No one is allowed to move freely in or out. Nick receives an email from one of Sarah's contacts about a piece of real estate Clyde bought. He finds all the properties Clyde has sold in Philadelphia over the last 10 years and notices that Clyde owns a small garage not far from the prison. Nick and the detective check out the garage and discover a tunnel Clyde dug that leads directly under the prison. The tunnel connects to every single cell. That's why Clyde killed his cellmate. It was all part of his grand plan. The detective checks Clyde's cell, but he's not there. Disguised as a janitor, Clyde slips past security and enters City Hall through a light check. Nick and the detective discover that Clyde has cameras everywhere, even in Nick's house, and a quote from Von Clausewitz about the center of gravity, which in this case is City Hall. Clyde has planted a napalm bomb to kill the mayor, who is about to hold a security. Nick and the detective rush to the scene, trying to stay quiet so as not to tip off Clyde. They spot Clyde's cart on the 5th floor, just below the conference room, and find a suitcase they suspect contains the bomb. The bomb squad confirms that the bomb is activated by a cell phone and could go off at any moment. Some agents monitoring Clyde's warehouse notify Nick that he's returned. Clyde heads to his equipment in the tunnel and watches as the meeting begins. He grabs a cell phone and heads to his cell. There, Clyde is startled to find Nick waiting for him, holding a gun. Nick urges Clyde to do the right thing and gives him a way out, but Clyde asks if Nick is there to make one last deal. Nick, finally understanding what Clyde has been trying to teach him, responds, "I don't make deals with murderers." Nick warns Clyde not to go through with, saying it's a decision he'll have to live with for the rest of his life. Clyde apologizes and makes the call anyway. Nick leaves, and as he does, he says that by the rest of your life, he meant about 25 seconds as the detective locks Clyde's tunnel door. Nick has placed a bomb under Clyde's bed. Clyde takes one last look at his daughter's bracelet before his cell explodes in flames.